would be nice when you're doing off-site, disaster recovery kinds of stuff, for it to get compressed first.
Yes, absolutely, and the venerable compressed utility in Unix is venerable. Tends to work pretty good for text sorts of things. You may find that your data compresses better with something else.
If it's not compressible, it's stuck regardless.
Yeah. But it is, like I said, you can pipe it through anything. So it's a lot of flexibility. You can pipe it into empty and send it to a tape. Now that I've mentioned that, when the receive occurs, the checksums are validated. Okay, so as we're receiving this send, I'm also validating checksums. So if something happens to that stream between the time I send it and the time I receive it, and I drop a bit, then today the entire stream is invalid, and we'll actually roll back. So we'll not implement any of the changes into that stream. Now, there's an implication here that's a little bit sneaky, and the implication is that I can take that send and just redirect it to a file, and then I can copy that file to tape, or I can send that file remotely, or whatever, and it can sit around for a few months. And then when I go to receive it, if I've dropped a bit in there somewhere along the way, I can't receive. Okay, so that's a gotcha. So that's something to, again, as I try to reinforce, this is not a replacement for your enterprise net backup. It's not a replacement for your normal, 2-tape managed backup system. But it is a clever way that we can take advantage of the structure of ZFS to make replicated copies. So, question here.
Yeah, I mean, the send and receive basically functions similar to the snapshot or snap vaulting feature of the network appliance, which is a enterprise class feature for doing remote offsite copies of your snapshots. It seems like it would be a really good feature in ZFS, but there seems to be a lot of gotchas. I'm just wondering if Sun has taken the next step and basically written either a complete set of scripts or a package or whatever that will send your snapshots, do the error checking, make sure the snapshot got to the other side, because it won't be enough just to do a snapshot between two consecutive revisions of your snapshots and send that over, because if the send failed, then you'll actually want to fall back and do a snapshot across,
right,
two or whatever. Like, you basically got to have some sort of error checking in there before you say, okay, that snapshot made it.
Yeah, so we actually want to receive it on the other end.
Right. So
and
has Sun done all the done the work to implement something like this?
So it's not a set project. In other words, there is not a project today, open source project, that does that. But there are a number of us who are implementing that sort of thing. And you're exactly right. Writing a cron job that sends snapshots is easy. Writing a cron job that can handle all the different possible failure modes, remote host down, remote host bad send, handling all those error conditions is very tedious work. And so that's where we're in the process today of trying to do that, to automate it. And whether that will, I'm sure it will roll back out as part of the OS in some form or fashion, or be available on the net somewhere to make that occur. But today I would say, again, the mantra is we're not replacing net backup or legato as ZMAN. So try to keep that in mind. Question?
Currently, when we do upgrades, we'll do a UFS dump of basically all of our root file systems, just to make sure that if there's anything that we need that's lost, we can get it back. Mm-hmm. Would the snapshots be kind of a replacement for that, or is there another tool that we should be using with ZFS? I can imagine there's a ZFS dump command.
So there is not a ZFS dump command, and you actually have two questions here, I think. And let me get the ZFS dump thing out of the way first. So, back when UFS was invented, tar was pretty lame. So tar, which stands for tape archive, came out of R, which was archive. And it copies files, and so you have this tar format, and it's file permissions, right? A little bit of the metadata information about the file, user group, mode, and here's the file and the file directory, and then here's kind of the data kind of thing. And tar really didn't handle devices very well at all. So if you were doing like a tar of /dev, then it would get to dev 0, and it would just so it was pretty lame, and but we needed a way to back up UFS, and so UFS dump was created. And UFS understands that, oh, this is a device, and I need to keep the data about the device, but not copy the contents of the device, and all this sort of stuff. And so and CP and some of those guys. So UFS dump was invented, and then UFS dump also had the ability to do incremental dumps. And so, again, using the file access or creation modification dates, I could do a set of incremental dumps in UFS dump. And so it became sort of the de facto backup utility for UFS. And then it has a counterpart, UFS restore, which does the reverse of the process. And UFS restore also can handle picking one specific file out of a restore, right? So that's how that worked. In ZFS, we don't have an equivalent of those two things, UFS dump or UFS restore. And so the idea is, again, that you're going to use, tar is a lot smarter now. You're going to use something like that, or Legato, or some sort of backup or restore technique. Now, it is true that you can UFS restore into a non-UFS file system now. Okay, so that is one way that people do migration from UFS to ZFS. If they do a UFS dump, lay in a ZFS file system, and then do a UFS restore. But there's not a way to go the reverse without doing basically some sort of a copy. Okay, so then in the process of making changes to my root, one of the things that you would do is do a UFS dump of the root, and that way, if I screwed up the change, I could do a UFS restore of the root and fairly quickly be back on the air. So with snapshots, we're actually changing that process a bit, and that we'll just do a snapshot of the root, and then we'll do a patch or a live upgrade, image update, or what have you. And then I can always roll back to the previous snapshot of root. So we're seeing that as being a very, very popular way of using the snapshot facility for ZFS root, and that now it is feasible for us to do a rolling migration of your system in a safe way that you have a good, fairly easy way to roll back to previous things. So that's dramatically changing the mindset that hopefully we hope that's dramatically changing the mindset that you have for managing patches. And when we get talking a little bit later today about live upgrade and stuff, we'll see how that gets leveraged as well in ZFS root. So it's all good stuff in that regard. Yes?
When does the ZFS root start to get Solaris 10?
Okay, ZFS root is in Solaris 10 update 6, which is 10.08. So it is available. Has it GA'd yet? I don't think it's GA'd yet. It's in revenue release. You can download it off the net. If you need a CD pack, I think they're shipping next week. But it is downloadable off the net today.
Just related to that, do you happen to know when or if they're going to turn update 6 into a patch bundle the way they did with update 5?
I have no idea.
Say it's doing a full upgrade, you can just install a patch buster and get yourself up to update 6.
But you don't get features, right?
You don't get new features, but you get all the fixes.
Did you say if, because it was stated that going forward they would be producing those patch sets?
Yeah, just notice it's not on the site yet. And there's no mention of it.
There's an option, if you boot off of an Update 6 disk, there's an option to patch, but I've never used it. I don't know what all it includes.
I'm playing around with patching lab server right now. I'm going to see if maybe by the end of the day I can have it up, but that's kind of dicey.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have more editorial comments on that in a few minutes. Oh, boy, that took so long, the screen blinked. Okay, let me move on then. There is the on-disk format was actually one of the first documents that was publicly available for ZFS, and if I'm not mistaken, Cindy, the document's probably fairly substantially out of date, 2006 kind of time frame. But the developers will claim, well, rather than writing that doc again, use the source. It was designed to be host neutral. So, UFS is very host specific. So, with the Indianness of the machine. So, if I have an x86 system and I create a UFS file system, I take the disk out and put it in a SPARC system, it will not be recognized as a UFS file system because the Indianness is little Indian versus big Indian architecture. In ZFS, it is Indian neutral, and that's indeed how it uses the same techniques that NFS does, right? So NFS is Indian neutral, so that I can share a file from a big Indian machine to a little Indian machine. You just never notice it. And so the same technique was used for the on-disk format as ZFS. So it is feasible then that I can take a disk from a SPARC-based machine, plug it into a x86 machine, and you'll be able to import the pool. That said, there's a bug having to do with symlinks and send and receive for the same sort of thing. Okay, so the takeaway from that is not that it isn't designed to be so. It is designed to be so. The question is, how well is it tested? And I don't know the answer to that. Okay, so if you're really going to depend on that, I would definitely test it to make sure that it all works as you would expect. And that includes the ZFS send receive. The ZFS send protocol should be Indian neutral. So we should be able to send from a SPARC machine to an x86 machine or versa versa with no problems. ZFS support brings together a couple of issues with it and a couple of opportunities. There are one of the irritants when you're doing something that has radically different user structure is how do we map a user ID like on NFS to a ZFS SID. And probably one of the hindrances to NFS in that environment is exactly this problem. So NFS was based on the Unix model of users and groups, and the NT and Windows ZFS stuff is a little bit more extensible and flexible. And so how do we reconcile that? So what we've done then is we've actually from day one included NT style ACLs rather than the UFS style ACLs into ZFS. And so that allows us then when we share a file system on ZFS a little bit of a better integration with the environment. And other things that occur there too, in UFS, file names are case sensitive, and in DOS they aren't. And so in ZFS, there's actually a parameter you can change on a per file system basis to decide which way you want to go, case insensitive or case sensitive. So that's one of the policies you can change. Let's see. There's also a kick out, and I don't know if anybody's cares or maybe we need to find out information about it. Is there's a virus scanner interface, shall I say. If anybody's interested in that, we might put it on the list of things to follow up with, but of how that works. But again, the goal in our world is that I can have my home directory somewhere, and then I can access it in a reasonably same way from either my Unix machines over NFS or ZFS client. Now this is not Samba, so if you're in Solaris 10, then you need this. You need to run Samba, and it has all the usual Samba caveats around that.
And that's update 6 or update 5?
When did Samba come in? Was it update 4?
It's definitely in 4.
Definitely in 4. The trick with Samba in Solaris 10 was we got into a version mismatch with the Samba.org release, and so because of the timing of the releases, we had patches to make ACLs work with ZFS and ZFS, but it was ported to a version of Samba that if you went to the Samba.org and downloaded their version, you wouldn't have the ACL stuff. And then the ACL stuff was imported to a later version or taken back by the community and then available in a later version of Samba. So there is a version mismatch of whether you use the Samba that's included with the Solaris 10 release on the companion CD, I think that's where it is, has the ACL stuff in it, but if you recompile Samba from the net, you may need to check to make sure you're on the version that has the ACL stuff in it, if you use ACLs.
When did native sys go in?
Native SIF is in Open Solaris, and that's the one that's not to be backported to Solaris 10. Not to be.
So not even 6 has it?
Not even 6.
How are you doing the authentication in the native sys? Are you just using PAM?
I have no idea. All I can say is mumble, mumble, AD, LDAP, something, mumble.
So I don't mean to sidetrack, but I'm interested in that point about it not being backported to 10. So I understand what's not going to happen, but when I'm not sure how Solaris version is going now. And
Okay.
if there will be an 11 and
I'll get to that.
Okay. I mean, because I understand the Sun's is going to be supporting Open Solaris, which may mitigate that problem of only being able to run Solaris proper. But
Yes, I'll get into that momentarily. Because I probably should have started with that, because it gets in, we're using build terms a lot to talk about when things come out. It gets confusing. Okay, here's an example of zones. Who uses zones in here? Holy gosh. My gosh, everybody but me uses zones in here. That's fantastic. I hope they work well for you.
Okay, maybe why don't you use zones?
Why don't I use zones?
I've been hearing
I don't know what.
it's going to become best practice to use even if it's just a single non-global zone.
Yeah, so one of the ideas when zones first came out was that, this is really cool. It's a really good way to have an environment that people can log into that they can't destroy. And so the first idea that came out is, well, that's great. I can set up my desktop use. So when you log into the desktop, you won't be logging into the global zone. You'll be logging into a zone, and therefore my desktop users can't trash the system. Great idea. When I stopped looking at zones was when there was something about the way owning devices like the graphics driver or the graphics card in zones was kind of an issue to be tackled at the time. So we do see a lot of it in server environments. Not so sure that we see it by default in desktop environments for graphical logins, but again, I may be out of date on that. But I do know that it's a really easy way to set up a fairly protected environment for people. And I know we're using it on a couple of projects working on just to manage workload independence and so forth.
Well, there are applications that can't take full advantage of all the threads and cores out there, and that you can have 32 cores on a system right now, and the way to take advantage of that with the applications that aren't well threaded is to have several zones that isolate each other, and then you can run multiple instances of the same application to get full access to full compute power.
Yeah, so there's a lot of flexibility there, and it dovetails and overlaps a fair amount with LDOMs and XVM, Zen, VMware, and all these other virtualization schemes as well. From the ZFS perspective, it's bits on disk, and therefore, there's some opportunities for efficiencies, particularly with snapshots and handling that. But I'll admit I don't know the caveats about patching and upgrades and all that sort of stuff. So this afternoon, if we can talk about zones, I'd like to get you guys talking about it and see where that sits. ZFS root we'll talk about later. ZFS test methodology. One of the other good things that you have the ability to do in a more mature organization, which you can read that, is not in the labs at Berkeley where this stuff first came out. And that is, while we had guys writing the main code, we also had guys writing the test code to go with it. So you'll find out there a thing called Z-test. And I believe it is on the Open Solaris or download site, and you can actually take it and run it. It runs batch mode. It runs a whole bunch of tests using TempFS by default. Basically, it's a test suite to test out the features of ZFS. So it is a way that we regularly test the thing, and it is part of our automated test framework. So again, the idea is that we can build good quality into it by having a solid test methodology that is also openly available to you guys. So summary, blah blah blah, a whole bunch of URLs. Okay.
Would those URLs be available to us somehow? Are we going to get a copy of the presentation?
Yeah, and this is off the ZFS website as well. This particular presentation. I think a lot of the URLs are actually.
I just went looking for it, and I noticed that there's also sort of a variation of this presentation on sun.com, but they're not the same.
Yeah.
If you go to blogs.sun.com/storage and search for videos or ZFS, there's a whole bunch of stuff, including a recent one on ZFS boot. There's a 3-hour tutorial by Bonewick and Moore. There's lots and lots.
Yeah, a lot of that will be up on mediacast.sun.com.
This is exactly, yeah.
Well, yeah, I do those videos, and that's why I feed them into that
Yeah,
blog.
so your name is up there on a lot of those.
I know it's there because I put it there.
This is exactly, yeah, if you Google, it's like 6 down, I mean, it's like that. The file name is ZFS_last.pdf.
Yep. And so yes, there's a, again, we're trying to leverage as much of this as we can. I'm not going to talk a whole lot beyond Solaris, but for those who are interested, there is an Apple Mac OS X port. There's a free BSD port as well, and For Linux, there is a Fuse, which is File Systems and User Space implementation of ZFS as well. So that the on-disk format's published, the source code is there for implementers to leverage from, and so it is has been ported, is possible on these other OSs. And then our friends at Nexenta also have rolled it into a storage appliance release of an Open Solaris, which uses ZFS as the primary store. Like I said, there's lots of activities in those regard. Now, we've been dancing around this topic for some time now today. This is why I probably should have put this up first to kind of give you an idea. Then, when we talk about builds and releases, how Open Solaris and Solaris 10 looks from a practical implementation perspective. So the Solaris 9 or previous Solaris train model carried forth. We had Solaris 8, Solaris 9, Solaris 10. We have what's called a quarterly update, although they don't happen every quarter. Those are typically referred to as, before they exist, we talk about them as updates, and then after they exist, marketing gives them a name like 1008. And so you'll hear us, on the one side of our mouth, talk about Solaris 10 Update 6. On the other side, we're talking about 1008, because marketing doesn't use the term updates. So basically, those are, you can think of as quarterly updates, although they're extending out in time now. They're about every 6 months of those updates. Sometimes those updates are pushed out by hardware changes. We are a systems company and we do develop hardware, and the scheduling for hardware doesn't necessarily match the scheduling for software, and we don't want to hold up one to hit the other, and so sometimes you'll see an update release that primarily provides hardware support, and then if that doesn't quite match as well, there may be a hardware update that occurs occasionally. But the idea is we try not to have too many of those. We try to have a more steady cadence of the Solaris 10 updates, and we have a long support cycle on that, 10 plus years. I believe Solaris 8 is going into phase 2 support. I'll probably say it wrong.
I think it's April.
April, or I was going to say February, sometime next year. Solaris 8 came out in what, year 2000, something like that. So those, it's kind of a slow train model there. Other slow trains you'll probably experience there's a big time lag now between Microsoft releasing XP and Vista, right? And if you actually go back and look at all the releases of Windows, you'll see that every release gets a little bit longer, and now you're talking years between OS releases, right? And a lot of that has to deal with, is this enough change to warrant all this work to do a big update release, and then we have to go back and test on 6 bazillion things of previous systems and upgrades and whatnot. Okay, so that model really works well in what I'll call the enterprise environment. Right? The people who are I'll say not the bleeding edge of stuff. They want stuff that's well understood, well supported, has been battle tested for some time before they roll into production. And so we have that sort of a marketplace the late adopters, maybe I'll call them late adopters, enterprise customers, late adopters. But then there's an enormous push for early adopters, and probably no marketplace more so than in the Linux marketplace, where people like Ubuntu have a steady cadence of new things being released all the time. And so we've come up then with a model of, okay, how do we satisfy both marketplaces? How do we allow bleeding edge people to bleed, but still retain stability for the enterprise and late adopters? And so today, I would say the bleeding edge stuff is under the Open Solaris banner, and then the plain Solaris 10 stuff is sort of the late adopters. So this is sort of the cadence. The idea is then that the community release, you'll hear, is called SXCE, Solaris Express Community Edition. Those are done bi-weekly for the most part. We have builds of those, and then, boy, this is an old slide. I'll have to say that these two bullets have effectively been changed. Have they? I guess they really haven't been changed. So we had a thing for a while called SXDE, Solaris Express Developers Release. And the Solaris Express Developers Release you could get with a service contract, and it was targeted towards people developing for Solaris, right? So the developers want to be on the leading edge, not on the trailing edge of the adoption cycle, right? So developer release has been effectively discontinued and rolled into what we're calling the Open Solaris releases. So that occurred. The first Open Solaris release under that banner was 2008-05. So in May of 2008, we had the first release of that. So that's going to be this guy here. And then 6 months later is about now. So that's Open Solaris 2008-11. And that is on track to come out today. Or not today, but this month. And then there's, I think it's April. Either April or May is the schedule for the next one, and so forth. So what's kind of flowing along this whole thing is what we call the Nevada builds. And NV originally stood for next version, but it's also an acronym for Nevada, so we call it Nevada. And so those builds occur every 2 weeks, and with a monotonically increasing number. So we'll refer to this number, right? So you'll hear us talk about build 100, build 80s. I think I said build 36 earlier today. So you hear us talk about what these mean, and they can be mapped right into a calendar, which is available somewhere that you can see the schedule for the builds when they're going to be released. And so what happens then is, for developers developing stuff for Solaris, they have to get their bits done and integrated into the Nevada train before they can take it to Solaris 10. Okay. And then what we do is we peel off a Nevada build release, and that is the basis for a Solaris 10 release that gets done. So you'll hear us say, for example, that Solaris 10 Update 6 is based on Nevada Build 88. Okay, and the Nevada Build 88 will pinpoint some point in time of when that came out. Okay, and so to some degree, things will follow that track. Now, over time, you're going to see less things being backported into Solaris 10 as we go forward with Open Solaris, just because we're diverging in time. So there's a lot of questions that come out about that then. A couple of things I'd like to point out: that in order, like I said, in order to get into Solaris 10 with a new feature, it's first got to go into Nevada, and then it has to soak there for some period of time before they'll let it work its way into Solaris 10. And the same is generally true for patches as well. So if I fix something, that fix will appear in Nevada before it will appear as a Solaris 10 patch. And that's not 100% the case, but by and large that's going to be the case. And so how should you approach your environments? And one of the ways that you can approach your environment then is if you have a test and QA group, then the test and QA group may be more interested in following the Nevada path as an early warning system to see how things are going to go. And sometimes you'll get to the case where, if I'm running into a bug in Solaris 10, we may ask you to try it in Nevada and see if the bug still exists. And so that's a way for us to kind of go forward and backwards through a quality timeline, if you will, of that sort of thing. So there are gotchas here, though. The biggest gotcha has been felt most recently and has to deal with how upgrades work. Okay. And sometimes you'll hear me say, upgrades are very difficult to test, very difficult to get all the bugs worked out of. So what's happening is we're into a phase now where we're going to ZFS root, which is a fairly substantial change in Solaris 10. We've had ZFS root capability in Nevada for 15 or 16 months. Okay, so there is a lot of people out there who have been running root on Nevada, but maybe didn't explore all the upgrade implications, because sometimes we just install scratch and don't upgrade, because one of the things that doesn't tend to get tested very well in every Nevada release is all the upgrade stuff. So upgrades kind of sometimes don't work so well. So there can be some angst in relation to that. There's another important thing is that, particularly if you've been dealing with Solaris 10, then you know the pain of patching. Let me provide a little bit of history. So when Solaris 10 uses the System 5 Release 4 packaging infrastructure, SVR4 packaging infrastructure, which was developed in the late 80s and designed to handle the machines of the time and the way we built machines at the time. And so some conscious decisions were made that, in retrospect, didn't carry through the test of time very well. And one of those was that back in the late 80s, disks were very expensive, and so we had a lot of diskless clients. And so in a diskless client environment, I actually won't have a disk on my desktop. I'll NFS mount it from a server, and then I could have a whole bunch of machines all doing the same sort of thing. And then in order to, because disks were expensive, we didn't want to have 18 copies of the OS, and so we had a read-only version of the OS that could be shared amongst all these guys, and that's typically referred to that as users. So /USR directory structure can be read-only and mounted on all these clients. And then the only things that each client needed were its own identity, and its identity mostly exists in etc and /var. So what would happen then is that if I had a package that had some files that go into USR and some files that go into etc, we would break those apart. And so I installed the user stuff once on the server, and then I installed the etc stuff on every diskless client. Okay, so you see where this is going, and now instead of one package, now I've got two. And in fact, I may have three packages. Okay, so if you look at a Solaris today, last time I counted, there's like 2,400 packages that make a Solaris 10 kind of a release. And some of them are this very case where this is the user stuff and this is the root stuff, and that's how it works. So in the early days then, a patch would affect one of those packages. So basically I would get an update of the package, and then when I patched, I basically update the package, and that worked. But that process fell down because the packages were so fine-grained that sometimes a patch actually impacts two different packages, and therefore the decision was made is let's have a patching structure that crosses package boundaries. Okay, so you see where this is leading. So now I've got these patches that affect multiple packages, and we've got thousands of packages, right? And this is the current state of Solaris 10. And it is also the state of Nevada. Now, one of the best things that came out of the whole Linux environment, in my opinion, is that people started experimenting with packages. And they started saying, well, okay, clearly, the Solaris way isn't the way to go. And then, maybe even the Microsoft way isn't the way to go. And then I've got all these software packages that are coming from all these developers in all these areas across the world. So I can't control them, like we can in a company put our thumb down. We can't do that. So some of the packaging technologies that came out into the Linux space with RPMs and Git apt and some of the other packaging techniques really exposed the problems that we have with Solaris rather dramatically. So the idea is, okay, well, let's fix it, right? Okay, we know it's broken, let's fix it. Great idea. Well, to do that is a rather major undertaking. It's a huge undertaking. And so that is what's clearly separating what we call Open Solaris 2008 edition from Solaris 10. We have a new packaging infrastructure that's more clearly based on the applications oriented. So, for example, I'll have a package for Apache. I won't have 4 packages for Apache.
Hooray!
When I patch Apache, I'll patch the bundle for Apache. So it's going to look a lot more like what you see in some of the Linux distros as far as the way packaging works. Also, features of, we call it IPS, the image packaging system. So other features that are included are the ability to use a repository on the net. So Sun has a couple of repositories on the net, and you can just say, find a package that does Apache and download it, install it, and there's a GUI tool that manages all that sort of stuff for you. So we're undergoing this transition then between all the old SVR4 Solaris 10 based packaging stuff into the new Nevada Open Solaris packaging scheme. And this affects everything, particularly the stuff the system administrators see. So that's your installations, your upgrades, the whole kit and caboodle. Okay. So just to pile on to the issue, the other thing we did with Open Solaris is we said, okay, ZFS will be your root file system. So in Open Solaris, you can't choose to use UFS for your root file system anymore. Okay. Now, okay. Perfect. That actually frees us from this albatross on our neck that is UFS, and allows us to take advantage of snapshots and clones. So what you see then in the IPS system in Open Solaris is it's integrated so that when I do an upgrade in Open Solaris, it will take a snapshot of my root, it'll make a clone of that snapshot, it'll install the stuff onto the new clone, and then I can activate the clone and reboot into the clone. Okay, so once we can get over this big hump of the transition, I think, there will be birds singing and dancing and rainbows and all that sort of stuff as we make it. So what does that mean for Solaris 10? It means you're not going to have IPS. Don't quote me on that, but the base OS stuff is going to be System 5 Release 4 packaging. Open Solaris, the base stuff is IPS packaging. In Open Solaris, there is a backwards compatibility mode, so I can add an old SVR4 package in the Open Solaris environment. So we have a way to carry forward in that. But you're seeing more and more IPS packages come available as that happens. So that's sort of the transition, and hopefully you can understand what we're trying to do and how we're trying to not surprise you with it and not drop it on you like an atom bomb. But you guys can help experiment and flesh out these things going forward along with it. So we have a question here.
I just wanted to comment that Open Solaris cloning feature is really nice because it's already saved me on one update that caused the network to fail on the system, and so I was able to revert immediately, and it just came back up.
Yeah, it saved my butt a couple of times as well. Well, it saved me a lot of time. Question?
Just a question about installing on packaging. Can you patch these old packages on others? What they bring?
When they bring.
In theory,
In here.
the patch ads should still work. Now, the people that put together patches sometimes make assumptions, and I don't know how the testing is going. So, and in fact, people who make those packages also make assumptions. In fact, so what we're finding is, as we go through this, is that some package writers will write pre-install scripts that do checking for certain conditions, and those pre-install scripts may check for existing other packages of some sort. And the package changes, names have changed or something, and that's a problem. Now, mind you, the Solaris 10 packaging environment, the package names change, and what some people don't seem to realize is that files move between packages as well. So when we say, it's a packaging system, the relationship between your package system and the files on your disk changes during the various Solaris releases and updates, which is, I mean, we're not trying to hide that from you, but it's not a well-known fact, I guess. It is for those of us who dealt with packages for a long time, but things move around, and so the people who usually get bit by that are people doing minimization. Does anybody do minimization here?
Like to.
Sure. Yeah. So minimization is what you do is you strip out all the junk in the OS you don't want, right? And say, I just want to do one service. I'm going to build a web server. It's just going to run Apache, right? Now, I don't need a Windows system. I don't need, all this other stuff. And so you want to go through and you'll say, well, I'll take out all these packages. You start chunking out packages, right? People very concerned about security, OS security, are very fond of this technique. But the issue they run into is, again, there's not a relationship between that package name and its description and the files on disk. And then the files move around between releases, and then, you want to patch this thing when it's all over. That could be a problem as well, because the patch may contain files that contain to a package that's gone. And then in the package header itself, you're supposed to put all the dependencies for this package in terms of other package names, and some people do a good job of that, some people don't do a good job of that. And so basically there's a big mess out there as a result, and so it's hard for people to come up with a minimized set. So again, that's something that's being fixed in Open Solaris, and that the package itself is more flexible, but it also has the goal of representing a feature set or a service, or in the case of Apache, there is a package for Apache. There's not 4 packages for Apache. Okay, so that's part of that transition we're in. I won't say this is going to be perfectly painless, because it's not going to be perfectly painless. So anyway, if you listen to us, then we talk about builds, we'll talk about Open Solaris, and we talk about Solaris 10 and the ZFS world. You can think of it as we have at each Nevada build, there's some sort of knowledge base of what is the pieces that construct ZFS and its relationship to the rest of the OS at that particular build. Now, we don't make changes to ZFS every build. That will come in as the development goes, but every once in a while there'll be a build that has a lot of major changes. Okay. So there's probably a question in everyone's mind right now of, well, you just said that there's these major changes that happen. How do we know about them? right? And that's an excellent question. Let me see if I have it bookmarked. I don't. If you go to the on community, there's a URL here which we call Flag Days Heads Up and Project Integration History. This is one you want to bookmark because it's the one that you'll refer to periodically for the build. So here's all the builds that we've done. You can tell this is project integration up to November 10th, which is today. Talks about build 103. Okay, and for all the major things that occur, there'll be an entry like this, and this is fairly concise because there's also what's called a request to integrate log, and the request to integrate logs are also available to you, but you're talking pages and pages and pages of changes, and this sort of distills it into the top, top few that you should probably pay attention to. And we actually have one for ZFS there at the top, right? So we have a flag day, we have new ZFS pass-through-x ACL inheritance rules. Okay. Personally, I have no idea what that is. I can click on the link though and find the ARC case. Now, in this case, PSARC is the Architecture Review Council for PS's platform Solaris? I don't remember what PS stands for. We just call it PSARC. And that's the committee basically that does architectural review and does that. So other interesting things in this particular release, build 103, there's a nice SCSI provider for Comstar. So maybe later if we talk about iSCSI in any sense. We have an iSCSI target currently in Solaris, Nevada, and it's got a few bugs lodged against it, and Project Comstar rewrites it in a more transport independent way. And so from Project Comstar we're going to have an iSCSI interface, a fiber channel interface, and so what that allows us to do then is have one basically SCSI state machine with multiple interfaces to it. So that's going to be better for us going forward. So Comstar is good stuff, good project to look at. Okay, so here we go, build 103. We go back in time, build 88. So what you'll see then, if you just kind of go back through here, is things that occur, in the various builds. And so sometimes, we'll talk about builds and talk about things that happen, and then you can go off and look at this page and get an idea, maybe of what's changed in that build or what have you. And most of these have URLs. Sometimes, though, I do note that sometimes if I click on this, which is a PSARC case, sometimes it takes a week or so for those to get published externally. So if you go to one of these PSARC guys and the URL is not found, then you might wait a couple of days. It'll show up. But that's where you see this. Now, I think what I wanted to do in build 89. Where did I see that? Build 87. All right. Build 87, we had a heads up reminder. Boy, that's rude. Can't get. The heads up reminder says build 89 will be restricted. Okay. This is a heads up to the developers that say, look, every once in a while when we get to one of these Solaris major milestones that we're going to peel off a release candidate from, then we'll restrict the build ahead of time for bug fixes only. Okay, in other words, you have to make the previous build, no last minute feature additions that then cause instability. Okay, so as you're watching the builds flow by, you'll see every couple of months, you'll see a reminder that there's going to be a restricted build. And that's what it should mean to you, is that, okay, this is the build upon which, in this case, we're going to build 89 is going to be a build upon which we make a release. Okay, so that's another way to kind of keep up with how the builds come through and how the releases show up. So, any question on how builds and how we talk about builds in Open Solaris?
What about Linux? Is there a Linux port for ZFS?
The Linux port for ZFS is done under the Fuse project. ZFS Fuse.
Licensing issues with the kernel,
So it's very different from ZFS for Solaris.
It has to run a user space. It has to run a user space because they won't put it in the kernel.
Yeah,
so it's not advisable to use it on a Linux system, ZFS.
I don't see how.
Not possible.
Well, like you mentioned Fuse, that's user land and file system stuff, but I don't know anything about it other than that's really the only way you can get to it.
It's 12:30.
But as I understand it, the licensing, GPL versus CDDL licensing issues are not considered resolved.
Okay.
Is that what it's called? Okay, so this is the main blog page for ZFS Fuse, and you can see he just had a release September, so he doesn't pull off every build into the Fuse thing. But here's where you go to see that he does refer to a ZFS pull version 13. Okay, so that will give you kind of a tie back into which feature set is available in that release. So, okay, it is lunchtime, 12:30, I think, for an hour. And lunch is back at the main convention hall. And those guys eat, they lead us out. So I'm going to recommend that we go ahead and stop for now and head over to the lunch. And
do these rooms get locked? Can we leave stuff here?